The woman in room 14 hadn't eaten in 2 days. Not because the hospital forgot her, not because the nurses didn't notice, but because every time a food tray arrived, she pushed it toward the empty chair beside her bed, the chair where her husband was supposed to sit, and said quietly, "I'll wait a little longer." He never came. Her name was Elena Marsh, 31 years old, 7 months pregnant with twins, and completely devastatingly alone in the maternity ward of St. Augustine General Hospital on the coldest Thursday in February. Elena had married Daniel Marsh 6 years ago in a small ceremony in her mother's backyard. No catering, no photographer, just paper plates, string lights, and a man who promised her the world with nothing but his hands and his word. She had believed him completely. Daniel was charming in that quiet, devastating way, the kind of man who remembered your coffee order and forgot your birthday in the same breath. He worked in commercial real estate. Elena worked 2 jobs, a morning shift at a pediatric clinic as a medical receptionist, and 3 evenings a week at a laundromat near their apartment. They were not rich, but they were for a while happy. The twins were not planned, but Elena had pressed her hands to her stomach the morning she found out and wept, not from fear, but from a joy so overwhelming she couldn't contain it. She had called Daniel immediately. He had paused on the phone for 4 full seconds before saying, "That's a lot, Elena." She had told herself the hesitation was shock. She was wrong. By the time Elena was admitted to St. Augustine General at 28 weeks for a high-risk pregnancy evaluation, she already knew something was broken in her marriage. She just didn't know how broken. The admitting nurse, a heavy-set woman named Margaret with reading glasses perpetually pushed to the top of her head, had processed Elena's paperwork and asked gently, "Is anyone coming to be with you today?" "My husband," Elena said. "He's just finishing a meeting." Margaret had nodded with the practiced neutrality of a woman who had heard that particular sentence. "He's just finishing a meeting," more times than she could count. Daniel did not come that evening. He texted at 9:47 p.m. Something came up. "You know how these things go. You're fine, right? The doctors are there." Elena had set her phone face down on the bedside table and stared at the ceiling for a long time. The next morning, Dr. Priya Nair, the attending OB, specialist assigned to Elena's case, sat across from her with a folder and the particular expression doctors wore when the news was serious, but not yet catastrophic. "Elena, I want to be straightforward with you because I think you're a woman who handles truth better than uncertainty." Dr. Nair was 44, precise, the kind of doctor who made eye contact when other doctors looked at clipboards. Twin B is showing signs of twin-to-twin transfusion syndrome. It means one baby is receiving more blood flow than the other. Right now it's early stage, but we need to monitor this very closely. There's a procedure, a laser surgery, that can correct the imbalance if it progresses. It's not emergency level yet, but it could become that quickly. Elena absorbed this the way she absorbed most things, quietly, with her hands folded in her lap, holding herself together through sheer structural will. "What does the surgery cost?" she asked. Dr. Nair hesitated slightly. "With your insurance, the out-of-pocket estimate is around $11,000. But we can connect you with our financial counselor." "11,000, Elena repeated. She said it the way people repeat numbers that don't belong in their world. "Okay." After Dr. Nair left, Elena called Daniel. He answered on the 5th ring. "There might be a surgery," she said. $11,000 out of pocket. The silence that followed was different from his usual silences. This one had texture. "Elena," his voice dropped. "I need to tell you something. I should have told you before you were admitted. I've been staying with someone. I have been for about 4 months. I didn't know how to, with the pregnancy and everything." "Who?" Elena said. It wasn't a question. It was the kind of word that falls out of the body. "Her name is Cassandra. She's a colleague." "Elena, I'm sorry. This isn't how I wanted." Elena ended the call. She sat in the hospital bed, 7 months pregnant with 2 lives inside her, and felt the walls of everything she had built come down in a single, quiet avalanche. Cassandra Voss arrived at St. Augustine General the following afternoon. Nobody invited her. Nobody needed to. She came because Daniel asked her to handle things while he dealt with what he called the logistics of the situation, a phrase that apparently was what a marriage and an unborn set of twins reduced to when they became inconvenient. Cassandra was 35, expensively dressed, and possessed of the particular confidence that comes from never having been genuinely afraid of anything. She walked into the maternity ward like she was walking into a business meeting, located Elena's room, and stood in the doorway. Elena looked up from the hospital bed. She had tubes monitoring her blood pressure. The fetal heart rate monitor beeped in steady, faithful rhythm beside her. 2 heartbeats, small and stubborn and determined. "I'm Cassandra," the woman said. "I think we should talk honestly." "I'm a little busy," Elena said. Her voice was flat. "Growing 2 people." Cassandra stepped into the room anyway. She looked at the monitors, at the IV line, at Elena's worn cardigan draped over the bedside chair. She looked at all of it with an expression that was not quite cruelty, but was its first cousin, that cool, assessing pity that was somehow worse than contempt. "Daniel isn't coming back to this," Cassandra said. She gestured vaguely at the room, at Elena, at the beeping monitors. "I think you know that, and I think we'd both be better served if we stopped pretending otherwise. The surgery, he's not going to help with that. I'm not saying that to be unkind. I'm saying it so you can make real plans." Elena looked at her for a long moment. "Are you done?" Elena asked. "I just think—" "Are you done?" Elena repeated. Quietly, standing in my room, next to my children's heartbeats, telling me what my husband won't do for us. Something shifted in Cassandra's expression. Something small. "He told me you were struggling before all this," Cassandra said. "And there was a defensive edge now, that you two had been unhappy for years. That this pregnancy was unplanned," Elena said. "I know." He paused for 4 seconds when I told him. I counted. She turned to look at the fetal monitor. "But they're here, and they have heartbeats, and I'm going to take care of them." She paused. "You can go now." Cassandra left. In the hallway, she passed Nurse Margaret at the station. Margaret had heard enough, not everything, but enough. She watched Cassandra's heels click away down the corridor and then looked back toward room 14. What happened next was not a miracle. It was something quieter and more real than that. Margaret finished her charting. She went on her break. She sat in the staff lounge, poured herself a terrible cup of coffee, and did something she had done 6 times in her 22 years of nursing. She made a call. Not to a doctor, not to administration. She called Father Dominic at the hospital's community outreach partnership, a volunteer, network connected to St. Augustine that helped patients with non-medical crises. Medical bills, housing, transportation, food, the unglamorous infrastructure of survival. "I've got a patient," Margaret said. 31, high-risk twin pregnancy. Possible laser surgery, $11,000 gap. Husband just left. No family listed in her chart. Father Dominic asked 2 questions: the patient's name, and whether she had consented to receiving help. Margaret walked back to room 14. "Elena," she said, "I want to ask you something, and I need you to not say no just because you were raised to handle things yourself." Elena looked up. Her eyes were dry. She had finished crying sometime in the night. Margaret sat down in the chair beside her bed, the chair where Daniel was supposed to sit, and said, "Will you let us help you?" Over the next 4 days, things moved. The Community Outreach Fund approved an emergency grant of $6,000 toward the potential surgery costs. A hospital social worker named James connected Elena with a state assistance program that covered another $3,200. Dr. Nair personally negotiated a reduced-rate payment plan for the remainder. On the 5th day, the fetal monitoring showed that Twin B's condition had progressed, enough to warrant the laser procedure. Elena signed the consent forms alone. Her hand was steady. "You're remarkably calm," Dr. Nair said, reviewing the forms. "I'm terrified," Elena said. But I've learned there's not much difference if you keep moving. Dr. Nair looked at her for a moment. I've been doing this for 16 years, she said. I want you to know I will take care of them like they're mine. The surgery lasted 3 hours and 40 minutes. Elena waited in a room with a television she didn't watch and a window that looked out onto a grey February sky. Nurse Margaret sat with her for the first hour, during her own lunch break, saying almost nothing, just present, just there. Dr. Nair came out of the OR at 2:17 p.m. She was still in her surgical cap. She pulled it off as she walked toward Elena, and Elena stood up from her chair, and for one suspended moment, the whole hallway was perfectly still. Both babies are stable, Dr. Nair said. The procedure was successful. Twin B's blood flow is normalizing. We'll monitor closely, but... She paused and allowed herself something that was almost a smile. They're both fighters. Elena pressed both hands over her mouth. She didn't make a sound. She just stood there in the corridor of St. Augustine General, with her palms over her face, shoulders shaking, and all of it, the waiting, the phone call from Daniel, Cassandra's voice in her room, the $11,000, the 4 seconds of silence when she told him she was pregnant. All of it moved through her, and she let it go. Margaret put a hand on her back and kept it there. 6 weeks later, Elena delivered 2 girls, 4 pounds 11 ounces and 5 pounds 2 ounces, by planned C-section in OR3. She named them Margaret and Priya. She had not asked permission. She had simply written the names on the forms. And when the nurse read them back, she looked up to find Elena watching her with quiet, absolute certainty. When Cassandra heard through Daniel, who heard through the mutual colleague Grapevine, that Elena had named her daughters after a nurse and a doctor, she said nothing for a long moment. Then she said she did that alone. Daniel said, apparently. Cassandra was quiet for a long time after that. She thought about the hospital room, the worn cardigan, the 2 heartbeats on the monitor, the way Elena had said, "Are you done?" not with anger, but with a kind of dignity that Cassandra had not expected and could not stop thinking about. She never contacted Elena, but 3 months later, she made an anonymous donation to the St. Augustine Community Outreach Fund. She didn't tell Daniel. Elena went back to work at the pediatric clinic when the twins were 3 months old. She negotiated a single, full-time position so she could leave the laundromat shift behind. She moved into a smaller apartment closer to her mother, who turned out, when actually asked, to be more than willing to help. She was not okay all at once. She was okay in pieces, the way most people are, one morning at a time, one feeding, one laugh, one small moment of grace that accumulated, slowly, into a life she recognized as her own. On the girl's first birthday, she sent a card to the maternity ward at St. Augustine General. Inside it, she wrote, "Some people come into your life for years and leave you emptier. Some come for 4 days and give you everything. Thank you for sitting in the chair." Margaret kept it pinned above her nursing station. For 11 years. The moral is that kindness shows up. It sits in the chair. It makes a phone call on a break. It negotiates a payment plan. It stays in the hallway during a surgery. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't ask for anything back. And sometimes, when someone has been told that they are alone, that they don't matter, that the situation is just logistics, a single act of human decency is enough to remind them that the world is not made of people like the ones who hurt them. It is made mostly of people like Margaret. If this story moved you, you're exactly who Soul of Kindness was made for. Subscribe to the channel so you never miss a story that reminds you what human beings are capable of at their best, in their hardest moments. And I want to hear from you. Has a stranger, a nurse, a doctor, or someone unexpected ever showed up for you when the people closest to you didn't? Tell me your story in the comments. You never know whose day your words might change.